So, as a Japanese American, we talked earlier. Um, the MTC. I mean, as far as language is concerned, I I think it's fair to say that it was a little bit easier for me than everyone else, especially like the people that had never heard a word of Japanese in their life. I was familiar with the pronunciation and the intonation, and I knew what it was supposed to sound like and how a sentence was supposed to flow. And I also knew like basic grammar structure, but my vocabulary was like nothing. So it was like I had all of the pieces to the skeleton, but there was nothing in between. So it was really interesting because I could think about it and I could look up a bunch of words and say a sentence, and the teacher would be like, "Wow, you sound great." And then they'd respond to me and try to get me engaged in a conversation. And there's nothing, like nothing's coming out. And it was really funny. When my first night in the mission home, I remember the mission president asked me to say the blessing on the food. And like after I'd finished, he was like, "Were you in the MTC for 12 weeks?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Why?" And then we were having a conversation the next day, and and all the missionaries were saying, "Yeah, this was a challenge with Japanese." And whenever I would chime in, he's like, "Oh, but Elder Lowe, you're a native speaker, so we don't really want to hear from you." And I was just like, it was kind of frustrating actually that he thought that, because I mean, I knew I sounded correct when I spoke it, but I didn't feel competent at all holding conversations. And I think I looked Japanese enough so that when I would approach people on the street and, say, you know, those lines that you say to get people to stop, I'd said those and practiced those enough to sound like I was native, so I could convince people that I was native from the get-go. But then once we would get deeper into conversation, I would just get completely lost because I didn't understand what they were saying. I didn't understand what this word meant. I didn't know how to respond to that, or like I would understand what they said, but like didn't have the words to. And so people were just like, "What's wrong with you? Are you And then they would say, "Oh, are you not Japanese?" And then they'd figure it out. So that was kind of something really unique, is that, I mean, I definitely had a really hard time learning the language, and was praying really hard for the gift of tongues actually, but it was just in a very unique way. There were certain skills that I was missing, and because of the way I look, there were also unique challenges with approaching people and having conversations. But by the end of my mission, I was there. I do remember there was definitely a point where I felt really comfortable and not afraid of the language at all. And it wasn't, I mean, obviously I'm still not a native speaker by any means, but there was a point where I felt like I just didn't have to worry about it anymore. And that if I ran into things I didn't understand, that I could figure it out. But that was because that was because I continued to study the language diligently throughout my mission. I actually learned more about my mom being away from her in Japan than I've learned my entire life living with her. Just kind of, I'd visited Japan several times, but it was just as a tourist. It was to go visit my grandparents, to just have fun over the summer, just doing fun things. So in my mind, Japan was just like this vacation spot where I did whatever I wanted. But actually, that was, my mission was the first time I lived there and really, really understood what it was like to grow up there, to go to school there. School in general is just really difficult. So in the U.S., we take college entrance exams to get into high school, but in Japan, you are studying to get into a certain high school in junior high. So it's like the process is just sped up, and there's more expected of you earlier because there are high schools that are better than others, and there's pressure on students to get into the best high school. So, and then of course, in high school, you want to get into a good college as well. So, especially from, ages, I want to say 12 to 18, that's just a really, really hard time for Japanese kids. And they also they're very, very involved in extracurricular activities and take them very seriously. And a lot of them go to private, they call them cram schools after school, and go as late as 10 o'clock at night. So it's like you just never see them. It's a very, very difficult lifestyle for them. So for that reason, I felt like I understood more so where my mom was coming from when with how she expected us to approach our education. Yeah, and I just and it's actually amazing how much I think language what was I saying? Language unlocks understanding of culture. In Japanese, grammar is the subject comes first, and then the verb, or what am I saying? Like it's subject, and then the verb at the end, and because in English, I feel like you can kind of anticipate what somebody's going to say. It's I was doing something. But in Japanese, it's something I did. You really have to wait till the end of the sentence to understand what somebody's saying. So, and I think that kind of keys into why Japanese people are just kind of stereotyped as reserved, because you really have to intently listen to what someone's saying before you actually understand what they're saying. And it also is part of their culture to not say exactly what they're thinking. So, like in one thing, Japanese people just don't ever really say thank you if you compliment them. They thank you if you like gave them a gift, but if you were to give someone a compliment and they were to thank you, that would just be really rude. You always deny it. And a lot of times people just say things to beat around the bush, like it's if someone invites you to come over to dinner, it's the culturally acceptable way to accept that is to deny it 3 times, and then on the 4th time finally accept it. So for that reason, I think I also understood a lot of why my mother is so indirect in how she expresses her feelings. And that's a challenge, I think, for especially Americans that serve in Japan, is that it's not that these people aren't human and they don't have feelings, but they're just not going to tell you that with their words. You kind of have to read between the lines. They won't, hug you and thank you so much for your work. They will just bow and thank you, and in a very, very passive way tell you that they care about you. It doesn't mean that they don't. It's just different. It's just much more indirect. And so it takes a lot of I want to say, like, intentional perception. You have to really pay attention to people and really observe them to know what they're feeling. And when you do that, I think people realize that you care about them.